Lost in Carmel by Terri Lee, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Scrapbooks, May 1988. I had to pee. I don't know why I remembered that just now. It's silly. Natalie trailed her finger over the old photo in her hand, as if touching the static image might release its magic. But that's my first real memory of life in show business. I had to pee. That's a great line, Sandra said as she scribbled on her notepad. I might have to use that. Natalie shrugged as she stared into the distance, watching a scratchy reel-to-reel of a 7-year-old girl lined up on a bench with dozens of other Shirley Temple hopefuls. A sea of interchangeable faces with curly hair tied up in bows, while Natalie's long dark hair refused to cooperate. All of them blissfully unaware of what happens to the Shirleys once they've outgrown the curls and the little girl voice. How the headlines dissolved into footnotes as photographers turned their attention to the newest shiny thing. Closing her eyes, she let the black and white recollection grow into a technicolor vision. The floral notes of her mother's perfume, as Nora bent to whisper in her ear, crowded around the memory. Pay no attention to all those cardboard cutouts, Nora admonished. The world isn't looking for another Shirley Temple. It's looking for Nathalie Hampton. The little girl just nodded her dark hair while her patent leather shoes swung to the rhythm in her head. I have to pee. It's fine to wander off wherever your memories lead, Sandra interrupted the reverie. Don't worry about keeping things in chronological order. I'll keep up. Jay Catsby jumped onto Natalie's lap. Unimpressed with the piles of photos, old movie magazines, and clippings Nora had meticulously scrawled away over the years, his small black nose sniffed at the bits of lunch left on her plate. She fed the old guy a bit of tuna while her hand drifted over the arch in his back to the tip of his silver tail. Over the last couple of weeks, the memories have all been painless, Natalie mused. I was exactly who everyone wanted me to be. Do you need to take a break? Sandra asked. Natalie shifted in her seat under the New Yorker's cool gaze, uncomfortable being a specimen under the microscope, an inconvenient fact for a woman who spent her life in front of the camera. As Monty's fond of saying, I've been on a break for 10 years. Why she'd ever let Monty talk her into this, she'd never know. He pushed and prodded while dangling the promise of a chance to set the record straight on a decade's worth of Hollywood gossip. As her long-suffering manager, he had a dog in the race, and the truth of the matter was her bank account could use the infusion of cash. She played the conversation in her head. A biography, she balked at the idea. I don't know anything about writing a book. Monty shook his head. You won't be writing it. They'll send a ghostwriter. The old friends had sat on a bench, mulling over the possibilities and the pitfalls, wine glasses in hand, watching the sun slip into the bay. Carmel by the sea was a Storybrooke village perched on the side of a cliff, gazing over the Pacific Ocean. Cottages with names instead of house numbers had whispered to Natalie when the Hollywood lights began to burn. Monty called it the other end of the world, acting as if he'd been on a transatlantic flight in a single-engine plane whenever he arrived after the 5-hour drive up California's coast on Highway 1. Natalie pulled her thin sweater tighter around her shoulders as the sun, like a grand dame of the stage, set the sky on fire before her final curtain call. Beautiful, Natalie acknowledged the performance. God, I love this place. Fill your lungs with that air, Monty. No thanks. I'm from LA. I like to see the air I'm breathing. I don't know why in the world I bother with you. Because we're the keeper of each other's secrets. Natalie looked sideways at her companion, studying his profile in the shadows. Chiseled cheekbones had softened over the years, but his grin remained intact. From the very start, they were two peas in a pod. In the early days, she'd been Monty's champion when the Hollywood rumor mill threatened to take down his fledgling career over gossip about his sexuality. Natalie refused to budge, and it was the power of her name that lent credence to his position and the leverage to ride out the storm. He returned the favor by challenging her with a question. Do you want to be Sandra D for the rest of your life, or do you want to be a serious actress? With Monty at the helm, he steered her away from the virginal characters Nora favored, right into an Academy Award. If only she'd listened to Monty concerning other decisions in her life, there might not be a need for a book to set the record straight. Speaking of secrets, Natalie frowned at her companion. It's 1988. Why would anyone want to read that stuff now, after all these years? Who'd care? Are you kidding? Monty turned in his seat. America's sweetheart, Nathalie Hampton, finally tells all. You could serve it up on a platter. Like John the Baptist's head? With a side of fries. Neither the public nor the publisher are interested in America's sweetheart. Natalie ignored his attempt at humor. What they crave are the scandalous details when their darling girl fell off the pedestal and landed with a thud. Well, that goes without saying, but if you're telling your story, you get to orchestrate the thud. Natalie lifted her shoulders in a non-committal reply. Besides, America's sweetheart is an old story, Monty. I remember it like it was yesterday. You don't even remember what we had for lunch. I never remember what I had for lunch, only who I had lunch with. Touché. What she remembered were all the times he'd stood toe-to-toe with the studio heads, demanding top pay for the young women who filled their pockets with box office receipts. When push came to shove, he was a man who she could count on, maybe the only man. He wanted her to write this damn book, and maybe she owed him that much. She had a lot to make up for. Now she sat across the weathered teak table in a shady spot of the garden, sifting through her life like a prospector and handing the shiny nuggets over to her biographer. Sandra Chase's pale blonde hair was pulled back in a half-hearted ponytail. Translucent skin that looked out of place in the California light, free of any makeup. Even the glasses perched on top of her head were colorless, nondescript, as if central casting had been told to send over a ghost writer. Shall we continue? Sandra turned her attention back to the yellow legal pad on her lap, while the tape recorder, waiting to be fed, continued to blink at Natalie. We'll go as slow as you need. Catesby, bored with the conversation, jumped from her lap in search of a sunny spot on the stone pavers, and Natalie brushed silver hair from her black pants. Now you sound like my therapist. Writing is a bit like therapy, Sandra said. You have to peel back the layers to get to the truth. More like picking a scab. That too, Sandra managed to smile. A corner of a faded clipping beckoned from the pile in front of Natalie. Shaky fingers pulled yesterday's news out into the light, old words still singing. It all seems so far away, it almost feels like someone else's life, Natalie said as her fingers traced the headline. May 10th, 1977, Los Angeles. It's not gossip if it's true, by Theodora Barrett. Come closer, my lovelies, and I'll share a juicy secret from the backlots of Paramount. It seems Nathalie Hampton has been missing from the set of her latest movie for several days. Of course, it's Hollywood legend that Miss Hampton disappears more often than Houdini, but this time someone close to the reclusive star hints that things may be different. According to my insider, it's been all-out war on the set of The House on Fremont, with tempers flaring and tantrums being thrown like grenades. Looks like the making of the psychological thriller has taken its toll on everyone involved, including Hampton's husband-manager, who made the ill-fated decision to bankroll this nightmare. The usually firm-handed director, Ken Otto, can't seem to corral his talent and wrap things up. Now his misplaced star only adds to the production woes for this money pit of a movie, already woefully behind schedule. You didn't hear it from me, but some say pulling the plug might be the best thing to happen to this beleaguered film, which has suffered from no shortage of bad press since its pre-production days. Bad news for Mr. Otto, but delicious tidbits for the rest of us. Until next time, darlings, Thea. Natalie sighed as she handed over the clippings to Sandra. I was going to say this was the beginning of my unraveling, but the truth is that spool had been coming undone for quite some time. Are you ready to talk about it? That's what I signed on for. I better deliver the goods. Natalie shook her head. Too bad old Theodora Barrett isn't around anymore to hear my side of things. Not that she'd ever let a little thing like the truth get in the way of a good story. Sinking back in the chair, the dark memories curled up in her lap, waiting for Natalie to unfold them, as if lining them up in a neat row with fresh labels would make sense of them. Well, Thea was right about one thing. I was AWOL. Sandra bent over her notes. Let's start there. Chapter 2, Flying and Fleeing, May 1977. Lights from the City of Angels spread out like a magic carpet to the horizon where they met up with the stars. Specks of gold danced and shimmered against the inky backdrop before being swallowed by the darkness. It was only then, as the private jet climbed high into the night air with the city falling away beneath her, that Natalie felt she could breathe again. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" the stewardess asked. She'd like a glass of water, please, Janice spoke up. Would I? Natalie turned away from the window to stare at the private nurse Monty had sent along. Janice shook 2 yellow pills from a small bottle. Here, this will help you sleep, and when you wake up, we'll be in Rome. She spoke in a low monotone, keeping her words soft and round, as if the tone of her voice might cause Natalie to shatter into pieces if she wasn't careful. The woman's misplaced cheerfulness made the offering of an outstretched palm seem more like a poisonous apple than sleeping pills, but Natalie took them anyway and swallowed like a good little girl, just like she'd done for the last 4 days as a hawk-eyed Nurse Ratched watched to ensure the medley of pills slid down her throat instead of being tucked into her cheek to spit out later. At least now she was no longer required to stick out her tongue for inspection. Closing her eyes, she turned her head, shutting out the nurse in her plain blue dress that fooled no one with her attempts at an undercover role. Shut out the pretty stewardess whose sideways glances at her famous passenger didn't go unnoticed. Even shutting out Chloe, always more a friend than an assistant. Chloe had her nose buried in a book, but Natalie could feel her gaze sliding over her whenever Chloe thought she wasn't looking. Everyone was always looking. Everyone reaching out to grab a piece. Can't they see I don't have any pieces left? Her head leaning on the seat back, she tucked the soft blanket up around her shoulders and stared out the window into the blackness. Hurtling through the dark, suspended between here and there, her distorted reflection stared back at her. Reaching up, she pulled down the little plastic shade, unwilling to look at the face she no longer knew. Are we there? Natalie asked as commotion in the cabin stirred her awake. Chloe leaned over, placing her hand on Natalie's knee. No, we've stopped to refuel. They said it won't be long, but I'm going to get some fresh air. Want to join me? Natalie pulled up her window shade and looked out onto the dark tarmac. Men were scurrying around the plane, signaling a large truck loaded with 55-gallon drums into position for the refueling. No, she shook her head, her tongue thick against the roof of her mouth. Where are we anyway? Goose Bay, Canada. Goose Bay? I know, Chloe grinned, but the stewardess said this is a common stopover for smaller jets before we cross the pond. She was standing now and shrugging into her sweater. Sure you don't want to come? Natalie sank back against the butter-soft leather seat. I'm good. She watched as Chloe and Janice descended the steps together, wind whipping strands of hair out of the neat bun at the back of Janice's head. The captain and his first officer followed, heading towards a large Quonset building, the captain tucking his head into the wind, holding onto his cap for good measure. I could step off the plane right here, disappear into the night and start a new life. Would anyone come looking for me in a place called Goose Bay? Instead, she snuggled deeper under the blanket, too exhausted to make her move. A quick glance at her watch told her it was 1 a.m., Los Angeles time. It was easy to lose track of hours sleeping through time zones. It was more than a loss of the hours. She'd lost track of days. Days spent holed up in the Beverly Hills Hotel morphed into days in the psychiatric wing at Cedars-Sinai after Monty answered her frantic call for help. Much of the details had been lost in the fog of those days. Disjointed and unattached images would pirouette in front of her and then disappear behind the curtain. But one image had crystallized. She'd squeezed her eyes shut against the disembodied likeness of her husband. Stan's face looked back at her with a cold, impersonal sneer. It was an old friend's phone number her fingers remembered when she couldn't remember anything else. Of course it was Monty she called, not her mother, not Chloe, and certainly not her husband. She'd lost Monty for a while, but when she cried out, it was he who came running. The look on his face when he came to her hotel room was the kind of detail that managed to pierce the fog her brain was still swimming in. She remembered him coming through the door, his questions rushing at her in a whirl of breath. He was moving too fast. She couldn't keep up. Scooping up her weary body, Monty laid her on the bed like a wounded bird, smoothing her feathers with a cool hand. The memory was blurry, but she could still see his right hand trembling as he dialed the phone and spoke in hushed tones to someone on the other end. She couldn't remember the conversation, but she'd never forget his eyes, looking through her to the twisted mess inside. The vision hurt too much to hold it, so she let it go, watching it fall into the black soup along with the rest of the visions from the last week to be sorted out later. It was Monty who called in a favor and secured the Lockheed Jetstar for her. He knew someone who knew someone, and of course he always knew someone. It was Montgomery Schneider's job to know everyone and everything about everyone in Hollywood, even the things nobody wanted to know. especially those things. Because his job wasn't just about managing talent, it was about managing relationships, and he was damn good at it.